All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about extremism. Extremism is always a sign of a society's decay. When a society resorts to extremism, that society has spiraled into the realm of madness and really degeneracy. Now, if you look at all the numerous examples in history of extremism, what you will find is that the societies that did those extremisms were societies that were evil. A country goes into extremism when it becomes evil. If you look at, for example, the French Revolution, kill this person, behead this person, decapitate this person. Oh, look, we went inside this guy's house and we went to his library and we found a book with the word king in it. He must be pro-monarchy. Oh my God, behead him. That's the type of stuff that was going on in the French Revolution. The French Revolution was extreme. Let's go to the Spanish Civil War. Oh, you are going to a seminary and you're studying Latin? Well, you must be an ally of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church is an enemy of the Spanish people, an enemy of el gente. Kill this person. And there was a situation that took place during the Spanish Civil War in which they found a young man who was intellectually slow, he was intellectually disabled, and he was working at a monastery maintaining the monastery's garden. That's what this guy was doing. He was intellectually handicapped, and he was simply a gardener working at a monastery. And they said, look, this man is a gardener for the monastery. He must be an enemy of el gente, an enemy of the people. And they murdered that young man. Extremism. And obviously, any sort of society that does such actions is decayed, morally bankrupt, spiritually dark, filled with a sinister nature and a sinister constitution. Countries go into extremism when they become evil. And there are many cases in history that demonstrate this. Oh, let's talk about, I don't know, the American Civil War. Was it really necessary to start a civil war to end slavery? All these Western countries had slavery, and yet they were able to abolish slavery without having to resort to a civil war. France had slavery, England had slavery, Spain had slavery, all these countries had slavery, and yet they were able to just abolish slavery without going into a civil war. America is the only country in the history of mankind that went into a civil war over slavery. Hey, we want to get rid of slavery. Oh, we're going to break away from the Union. And what did the South do? The South made its own constitution, which for the most part was just like the American Constitution, but the South said that the Confederacy is based on science when it comes to the races. What did it mean by that? Well, it was saying that they subscribed, that the South subscribed to the theory of evolution, which said that blacks were not as evolved, and so therefore slavery is justified because the white man is more evolved. So the South breaks away from the North, bases its new country on racism or Darwinism or scientific racism. And all of a sudden, there's a civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed. Up to 1 million plus people were killed in the American Civil War. Was it really necessary? Eventually, slavery would have phased itself out. There could have been some compromise made between the North and the South. It did not. My whole point is, and I'm not saying that slavery is good, but my whole point is that there could have been another solution other than civil war. What happened? Americans resorted to extremism. America is a nation of extremes. It's a country that resorts to extremism when extremism is not necessary, and when faced with an extreme situation, will belittle that situation and will prescribe a solution that is not even fitting for the problem. So, for example, in America, we have all these mass shooters. And these people are the most atrocious of criminals. They go out, they murder people. They're mass murderers. Obviously, they deserve the death penalty. Now, here we have an extreme situation. A man is a mass murderer. This is obviously an extreme situation. So it requires an extreme solution, the death penalty. But what happens? All these Americans start pearl clutching. They start hollering out, and they start remonstrancing and complaining and protesting and saying, oh, this person doesn't deserve the death penalty. Human rights, constitutional rights. Oh my God. It's like, this man is a mass murderer. He has forfeited his right to life. He has forfeited his right to have rights. He is a mass murderer. Obviously, he is an extreme criminal, and therefore he deserves an extreme punishment, the death penalty. And that's why the death penalty is reserved for the most extreme of criminals. But what happens anytime someone says, hey, this person deserves the death penalty because he has done such a destructive and atrocious crime? He has done a crime that really is irreparable. So therefore, he has forfeited his rights completely, even his right to life. Justice must be done. He deserves capital punishment. Oh no, you have all these lawyers who come out. Oh no, rights, human rights, constitutional rights, blah, 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 blah. He deserves rights. Here's an example. And this is not just an American problem. This is it's a Western problem, really, because you can look at Norway and see this sort of thing. Anders Breivik. One of the biggest mass shooters in the history of all mass shootings. He massacres a bunch of kids. And the guy gets put into this luxury prison because in Norway they have luxury prisons even for the worst of criminals. Oh, and he can play sports with the guards. I think he can play like volleyball or ping pong or some bullshit like that. This guy's a mass murderer. Obviously, he has done an extreme crime and is deserving of an extreme punishment. But all these people come out and they say, oh no, human rights, he doesn't deserve the death penalty. But God forbid somebody wants to have a rooster in their backyard or wants to have backyard chickens. All of a sudden you have an entire neighborhood or multiple people in a neighborhood that rise up and say, oh, this guy, he has chickens, he has roosters. Call the HOA, put a lien on the house, punish this person because he wants to be self-sufficient in some way. God forbid somebody wants to be self-sufficient in some way or another. Oh, he has chickens. Call the city, have the state come in and remove all the chickens, kill the chickens. Because God forbid someone has a chicken that's laying an egg, the chicken could then spread some disease and we're all gonna die. I mean, that is an extremist mentality that is exemplified in a situation that where extremism is not necessary, where an extreme mentality is not necessary. Somebody wants to have chickens, big freaking deal. I saw this video years ago. Some woman wanted to have a garden, and she had a compost pile, and she had a garden, and her neighbor came along and wanted the HOA, or I think even the state, to come in and say, oh, remove your garden, remove your compost machine, or remove your compost pile. It's like, what? Eventually the lady was allowed to have her garden, but why in the hell do we need permission to have chickens or to have a garden? I mean, if you have 6 chickens in your backyard, they're not harming anybody. But again, America is filled with this sort of extremist mentality. You have people, you see, they want to show mercy on people who are not deserving of mercy, and they want to be ruthless on people who really are deserving of freedom. It's just, it's the opposite. Everything's the opposite. And this is a sign, this is an indication of an extremist society. And you can see this throughout history. The French Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, there's so many examples of this, but societies really show their own moral decay when they resort to extremism. Going back to slavery, Mexico had slavery, and Mexico got rid of slavery without a civil war. Wow, who would have guessed? And Texas was under Mexico. So Santa Anna, the Mexican government, comes along and tells the Texans, hey, we're getting rid of slavery, so you guys are going to have to cut out that whole slavery thing. You guys have to cut that out, all right? No more slavery. And these Texans get up and they say, what do you mean no slavery? And the Texans revolt. And you have the Mexican-Texas War. The Mexicans were right. The Mexicans said, okay, we're getting rid of slavery. You, Texas, you're under Mexico, so you have to get rid of slavery. And these Texans said, hell no, and they revolted. And to this day, Texans celebrate the Texas War against the Mexicans, and they remember the Alamo, and they talk about, Davy Crockett this and Davy Crockett that. What a crock of shit. All right, Davy Crockett was no hero, but yet we will glorify Davy Crockett and we'll glorify the Alamo. Oh, and if you come to Texas, everyone has to see the Alamo. And I visited the Alamo several times. It really is just a giant crime scene. It was a shootout. You had some Texas gangs that were revolting against the government, and the Mexican government fought against them, and they had a shootout. What is this? What is there to glorify? There's nothing there to glorify. You go to the Alamo, it's an old building, it's covered in bullet holes. You can still see the bullet holes, which is quite amazing, from the battle. And people say, oh, look, amazing heroes. How are these people heroes? They made a pledge to the Mexican government that they would follow the laws, and then the Mexicans come along and they say, hey, time to get rid of slavery. Nope, not gonna do that, and they revolted. Extremism. This is extremism. America is an extremist society, but it's not just America. Any society that falls into extremism is in decay. Mexico is an extremist society. I'll give you guys an example of what I'm talking about. Mexico is a country that is riddled with crime. I mean, it has a much larger crime rate than that of the United States. That goes without saying. Everyone has heard about Mr. El Chapo Guzman. Everyone has heard about the cartels and the narcos and the drug dealers, right? Mexico is a crime-ridden country. Now, not all of Mexico. There are some very nice areas in Mexico. I know because I've been there. I used to live there. But nonetheless, Mexico is a country that is controlled by criminal organizations, cartels, etc. And I remember when I was living there, you would always see these half-completed, half-assed construction sites. You would see these half-made buildings, unfinished buildings. You would see the beginning of a construction project, but it would never get done, and months would pass, and you would never see any bit of progress for these structures. So I remember asking one of the locals one day, how come these buildings never get done? How come these buildings have been sitting here without any sort of progress? And this person explained it to me. He said, oh, because this whole area is controlled by the mafia. There's a Mexican mafia, local mafia. They run everything here. And so these buildings are being built on their territory, whatever the hell that means. I mean, I guess this whole thing is just determined arbitrarily. Yeah, this is our territory, so you can't finish your construction site because, well, you haven't paid us. So the people who are doing these building projects, they didn't have enough money to pay the state and pay the mafia. So you have a state within a state type of a situation, which is a sign, which is one of the biggest signs of corruption and societal decay. And this guy explained to me that's why these buildings aren't completed, because they don't have enough money to do the project, pay the state, and pay the mafia. So obviously this is a sign of horrendous corruption and societal decay. So I remember I had this teacher that told us, okay, class, and the project wasn't really a bad idea. It actually was a really good idea, but it gave us the opportunity to hear what sort of bullshit runs in people's minds. So the teacher says, okay, guys, I want you to pick any country you want. And I want you to specify a problem, specifically an economic problem, in the country of your choice. And I want you to articulate a solution that you would propose to fix that problem. Okay, good idea. So this student gets up, and he's an Hispanic student, and he said, I chose my country, Mexico. Okay, so what problem do you see in Mexico, and what's the solution that you propose to fix said problem? So the student gets up there and he says, I think one of the biggest problems in Mexico is all these damn taco carts. That's what this guy says. One of the biggest problems is all these taco carts. They're littering on the streets, they're making the place dirty, and they don't pay taxes. We need to be imposing heavy taxes. That's what this guy said. Heavy taxes on these taco cart owners because, well, they're not really paying any taxes, or they're not paying enough taxes, and they're making the streets dirty. We have to penalize them, get all the money we can out of them, impose them with heavy taxation, blah, 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 right? And this guy is just going off, not on the mafia, right? So he's just, this is a real trip. So you have all these half-made buildings in town, right? And it makes the town look ugly. I mean, all these half-made, half-assed constructions, all these half-assed construction sites, they were all eyesores, and that goes without saying. And the problem wasn't, hey, we have all these unfinished buildings in town, let's have the state actually go against the mafia and allow these investors to complete their construction projects and make the town look better. No. That wasn't what the guy said. The big problem with Mexico is all the taco carts, not cartels, the taco carts, and we have to punish the taco cart owners with heavy taxation. I mean, this is what I was hearing, right? So the problem is taco cart owners, that's your enemy, but not mafia, not cartel guys, right? I mean, it's a load of bullshit, right? But this is an extremist mentality. The extremist mentality that says, I want to go harsh when harshness is not necessary, and I want to be indifferent or merciful to evildoers when a serious solution is necessary to fix the problems that are caused by the worst people in society. And the worst people in Mexican society are the cartels and their enablers. And that's quite conspicuous. But this is the type of bullshit that I have been seeing for much of my life. Oh, this person has a garden, this person has chickens, this is a big deal, blah, blah, blah. Oh, God forbid, a church is going to get built in your neighborhood. People, and I've heard of this sort of thing before. People don't want a certain, oh yeah, that's another thing. People, somebody puts a cross on their front yard. Oh, and a bunch of atheists get pissed off. Extremism, right? That's an extremist mentality. Okay, someone has a cross on their property, or God forbid, someone has the 10 commandments in a courtroom. Big deal, get rid of it. Huge deal, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Oh my God, the atrocities, the inhumanity of such statements. Thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. Remove it. Remove the 10 commandments. But Charlie Manson is a mass murderer and he's in prison and he deserves the death penalty. Oh, don't kill Charlie Manson. Have mercy on him. So they're merciful with the serial killers and the mass shooters, but when it comes to things like the 10 commandments, oh, they are sure as hell ruthless. In Mexico, you have cartels who have committed massacres, mass murder, mass rape. They melt people's bodies in barrels of acid. But where is the outrage? There's not a whole lot of outrage in Mexico about the cartels. Now, don't get me wrong, you do have people who are outraged, and they do express that, but the problem is that they are too much of a minority, and their voices are not sufficient enough to actually make a real change, to actually make some real progress against the evil of the cartels. So this is an extreme society. Mexico is an extremist society. I'm pretty certain there are people in Mexican prisons who are in those prisons for crimes that are not as bad as being, I don't know, a cartel member. But yet, cartels are still all over Mexico, dominating that society. Oh, hell, you have judges. You have judges in Mexico, or you have people in Mexico who are criminals, who have worked with cartels. You have lawyers who have backed cartels, and they have defended cartels, and they want to become Supreme Court justices in Mexico, or they want to be some sort of judge in Mexico. And what do many people in the Mexican government say? Well, this is freedom. That's freedom. That's their right. That's their right. And you have in Mexico you have this thing called narco corridos. It's literally an entire music industry that is dedicated to making songs praising cartels. I'm not joking. They praise mass murder in this music. They praise crime. They praise all sorts of horrific things. And I remember listening to this one song years ago, and it was made for some particular cartel or something. And the song said something like, "Somos muy sanguinarios," which means we are bloodthirsty. And he was saying this with pride. He was saying this with jubilation. He was saying this with his ego. Like, we are bloodlustful. We love blood. We're bloodthirsty. Like this was an amazing thing. And these songs get millions of views on YouTube. Mexican people are listening to this stuff. And you think to yourself, wait a second. Aren't you guys supposed to be going against this sort of evil? No. You tolerate it, and not only do you tolerate it, but you embrace it to a certain extent, to a great extent. You embrace it, and then people wonder why Mexico has all this crime. That's the reason why. It's the glorification of crime. Now, praising criminal behavior, praising mass murder, this is obviously extreme. Right? This is obviously dangerously extreme. And you would think such an extreme problem would be responded to with an extreme solution. But no, the response is what? One of embracing this cult, this religion of criminality. Now, I remember years ago, there were a bunch of Mexican farmers in a state called Michoacan, which is in southern Mexico. And these farmers had enough of the cartel violence. These were lime farmers, avocado farmers, and this was back, I want to say in the early 2010s, mid 2010s. And if you were a lime or avocado farmer in the state of Michoacan back in the early and mid 2010s, you were living in an extremely dangerous situation. I mean, Mexico still is dangerous, but in those days, there was a specific cartel that was targeting these farmers. It was called the Caballeros Templarios. That means the Knights Templar. Very Masonic, if you think about it. And it was a demonic cartel. It was a cult. They were involved in cannibalism. They would actually have a ritual. It was an initiation ritual for people who wanted to become members of the cartel/cult's innermost circle. And in order to become approved, in order to be allowed entry into the innermost circle of the Knights Templar cartel, you actually had to eat the heart of a child. I'm not joking. I mean, really demonic stuff. And a bunch of farmers were being murdered. They were being exploited. They were being robbed by this cartel, because the cartel would come in and say, "Okay, you sold this many avocados. You sold this many limes. So you have this much money. So you're paying a tax to the government. Okay, but you paying to the government is not enough. You got to pay to us." And so they had to pay a tax to the government and the cartel. So they were really, really being robbed. Of course, the government wasn't doing a damn thing about it. You would think, extreme situation, right? Farmers are being robbed. And when they did not pay the money, they would actually murder farmers, or they would murder family members. So there's an example I can think of where there was a avocado farmer, and he couldn't pay the money. So they said, because you couldn't pay the money, we have kidnapped your daughter. And they kidnapped this man's daughter. So he said, well, I'll pay the money. So he sold everything he had. He sold his house. I think he sold his farm. He sold everything, this guy. And he says, here's the money. And they said, here's your daughter. And they gave him a bag. It was a black bag. And inside that bag, you can imagine what was in that bag. It was his daughter, but cut to pieces. And so it was that sort of evil that got a bunch of farmers to say, F this, enough is enough. And they revolted. And they got their guns and they started shooting these cartels. And then what happened? The Mexican government came out and said, these people are terrorists. So hold on. So for all this time, these cartel killers, these Sicario killers, have been brutalizing these people, murdering, raping, you name it, they were doing it. And no one really did much about it. And then all of a sudden people have enough and they snap and they start killing these people. Those people are the terrorists. You see, this is the extremist mentality, right? You have an extreme situation, requires an extreme solution, but you're merciful and you are tolerant toward people who don't deserve tolerance and mercy, cartel mass murderers, but you're ruthless against people who actually decide to fight against cartel murderers. I mean, this is the extremism, right? And this is a sign of a society's decay. French Revolution, behead this guy, behead that guy, kill this other person. Oh, look, we went into this guy's house, found a book, and they actually did this in the French Revolution. If you had a book with the word king in it, you're an enemy of the state, you're now going to be taken into custody, and they would behead you. I mean, it's this sort of sickness that plagues a society when that society is decayed. Now, there are biblical explanations for this. There are biblical examples that really shed light upon this reality. So, for example, we have the story of Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi were the sons of Jacob. And there was a situation where they had a sister named Dinah who got raped by the prince of Shechem. Now, Shechem was a city that was inhabited and ruled by the Canaanites. And these Shechemites, they were Canaanites. And so their king raped the sister of Simeon and Levi. This is in the book of Genesis. So what happens? The prince of Shechem, it was the prince that raped the sister. The prince of Shechem falls in love with Dinah after he rapes her. Now, it's a very ugly situation, obviously. But the prince says, I'm in love with this girl. And so he goes to his father, the king of Shechem, and he says, Father, I have fallen in love with this woman, this Hebrew woman. So the father goes to Jacob, the father of Dinah, and he says, my son has fallen in love with your daughter, Dinah, and he wants to marry her. And we want your permission. So we want your blessing, in other words. So Jacob comes along and he says, okay, if you want to marry my daughter, that's fine, but you have to convert to our religion and you have to become circumcised. And the king and the prince say, no problem. And not only do they agree to convert to the religion of Jacob, but they also encourage their entire city to also convert to the religion of Israel. So all of the men convert, all the people convert. The men get circumcised, which was what was obligated, and they convert. So instead of saying, hey, look, yes, there was a problem that happened. There was an ugly situation that happened with our sister, but this entire city has voluntarily converted to our religion. Here is a chance for Israel to come together with the Gentiles. Here is a chance, here is an opportunity for the Gentiles to be grafted into the tree or the root of Israel, and to be grafted into the seed of Abraham. But what happens? Simeon and Levi say, no, we're going to commit mass murder. And they commit mass murder. And they waited for all the men to get circumcised, and they knew that all the men would be fatigued and unable to defend themselves. And they go from house to house to house, murdering all of the men of Shechem. And Jacob says, what the hell are you guys doing? Now, they could have been reasonable. There could have been some kind of reason exemplified in this situation. They could have said, all these people have decided to convert. Now, now I understand if they were just angry at the prince. I can understand that. But that's not what they did. They went around murdering all the men of the city. Men who had nothing to do with the rape of their sister. Did they rape their sister? Did these men rape Dinah? No. But Simeon and Levi decide to commit mass murder. And what happened when Jacob was in his deathbed? When he was on his deathbed, he looks at Simeon and Levi and he says, you guys have shed innocent blood. And because of this, you will be scattered. Your descendants will be scattered within Israel. Now, if you read the Targum Jerusalem, which is also known as the Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan or the Palestinian Targum, which is it's really a translation of the Torah / interpretation. So the translation is also, the interpretation of the translator is reflected in the translation itself and how the verses are rendered. When you read the Targum Jerusalem, or the Palestinian Targum, as it is also known, Jacob says that you Levi, your descendants, Levi's descendants, will be scattered. He specifies Levi, and it's very interesting because what happened in the future? The Levites became the people of the priests. They became the clan of the priests, or the priestly family, and they would manage the temple. They would do all the sacrifices. They would do all the incense. And so when Christ came along and Christ said, your priesthood is done away with, your priesthood's end is nigh, it is coming, your days are numbered. When Jesus said that, he was declaring the coming of the fulfillment of the curse that Jacob proclaimed onto Levi when he was on his deathbed. It really is quite profound. So there was the extremism of Levi. And then what happened? What happened with the sons of Jacob? Well, they had a brother named Joseph. Very fascinating, super fascinating stuff, guys. I really want to share this with you guys because I've been thinking a lot about this. So you have Joseph. Joseph is one of the sons of Jacob, and he is loved by Jacob. And Jacob gifts Joseph with a cloak. It is a cloak of many colors. It has many colors on it. And what did that represent? The cloak of many colors. It represented humanity. It represented all the members of humanity, all the nations, all the races of humanity united under God. That's what it represented. And Jacob says, here, my son, this cloak of many colors. And so Joseph wears the cloak, and it represented what? Humanity. All the Gentiles uniting with Israel, and thus humanity uniting with itself. Humanity coming together under God. And what does it say in the book of Genesis? That the other brothers became jealous of Joseph, and they wanted to murder Joseph. Really interesting. So Judah comes along, and he says, listen, don't murder Joseph. Don't kill him, all right? Just put him in the ditch or something like that, and then eventually we'll just sell him off to some other people, but don't murder him. Now remember, Judah, he was trying to make the best out of the situation. He did not want to murder his brother. He knew that the other brothers wanted to murder him, and he knew he couldn't stop them from actually laying their hands on Joseph. So he said, okay, don't kill him, but just at least sell him. Just don't kill him. So he was trying to find a solution to the situation that would not lead to the murder of his brother. And remember, Christ comes from the line of which son of Jacob? Of Judah. The Messiah comes from the line of Judah. And so Judah saving the life of Joseph is a presaging sign of the coming of the Messiah saving humanity from hellfire. So Joseph comes along, and Joseph meets his father Jacob. It's really interesting. Joseph goes to his father, and Jacob says to his son Joseph, aren't your brothers supposed to be watching the flock at Shechem? Aren't they supposed to be watching the flock at Shechem? Very interesting. Now, what happened at Shechem? Mass murder. Simeon and Levi murdered those people who had converted to their religion in Shechem. The massacre, the bloodshed, the great crime was done at Shechem. And so Joseph is told by his father Jacob, aren't your brothers watching the flock at Shechem? Now, in this case, they were supposed to literally be watching some cattle or some sheep at Shechem. But there is a spiritual symbolism here. What does this symbolize? It symbolizes that they were supposed to be leading the people to God. They were supposed to lead those people to God, but they didn't. They murdered those people, and Levi murdered those people. And Levi's family would end up being the shepherds of Israel. The shepherds of Israel, the spiritual shepherds, that is, of Israel, came from the line of Levi. And yet it was Levi and his brothers who were supposed to lead those Shechemites to God. They were supposed to lead those people like a shepherd leads his flock, but they didn't. They murdered those people. Aren't your brothers watching the flock at Shechem? So there's a spiritual symbolism there. And so Joseph says, well, let me go to my brothers. So he goes to Shechem, and guess what? His brothers aren't there. Why aren't the brothers there? Well, because they were plotting to murder Joseph. So they were supposed to be watching the flock, but instead they were conspiring to murder, especially Levi. They were conspiring to murder. Now, what does this symbolize? Because when you look at the Bible, people look at verses in the Bible and they say, oh, it means this, right? They were supposed to be watching the sheep. But biblical stories have multiple layers of meaning. They have multiple dimensions of significance and meaning. And we have to really dig deep into these things to understand the deeper meaning, to understand the other meanings. And we do this by looking at different stories in the Bible, paralleling them together, looking at the New Testament in light of the Old and vice versa, looking at stories in the Old Testament in light of other Old Testament stories. So they're supposed to be watching the flock at Shechem, but they're not there. They're conspiring to murder. Now, what happened before? What happened was they were in Shechem. The people of Shechem converted. They were supposed to lead those people to God as a shepherd leads his flock. But instead of doing that, they conspired to murder and they committed murder. Now, fast forward to this situation. They're supposed to be watching the flock at Shechem. When Joseph gets there, they're not there. Why? Because they are conspiring to commit murder. And so Joseph eventually finds his brothers. They're conspiring behind his back to murder him, and they throw him into a ditch. And we know the rest of the story. He ends up going to Egypt. He ends up getting really well connected to the Pharaoh, and he ends up winning in the end. Now, what happens not too long after that story? What happens not too long after they sell off Joseph? Judah marries a Canaanite woman. Very interesting. So let's connect some of the dots here. The people of Shechem were Canaanites. Now let's rewind even more here. Abraham had a priest named Melchizedek. Melchizedek was Abraham's priest. And Melchizedek presented to God as an offering, the offering of bread and wine, precursing or presaging the sacrifice of the Eucharist and the wine that Christ would offer during the Last Supper. So then you fast forward. Jacob and his sons are in Shechem. The people of Shechem are Canaanites. So Melchizedek, Abraham's priest, is a Canaanite. The people in Shechem who decide to convert to the religion of Israel were Canaanites. Levi and Simeon slaughtered those Canaanites. Now, fast forward, they're supposed to be in Shechem watching the flock, symbolizing how Levi was supposed to be leading those Shechemites to God as a shepherd leads his flock, but instead conspired to murder them and murdered them. And then, fast forward, they're actually not in Shechem. They're conspiring to murder Joseph. And then after they sell Joseph off, Judah, whose line Christ would come from, marries a Canaanite, symbolizing the grafting of the Gentiles into the root of Israel. And remember, Joseph had what? He had the cloak of many colors. And Levi hated him. Now, the Bible doesn't say that Levi specifically hated him, but if you read the Targum of Jerusalem, or the Targum Jerusalem, or the Palestinian Targum, it says that Levi was the main conspirator against Joseph. He was the one who especially wanted to murder Joseph. Levi, again, was the one who murdered those Canaanites. Levi was the one who was the patriarch of the priestly family, the Levitical priesthood, the very priesthood that would later on murder Christ. And Christ was of whose priesthood? Melchizedek, who was a Canaanite. It all comes together. But what was the evil of Levi? Extremism. He resorted to an extreme solution when that extreme solution was not needed, and when that extreme solution was indeed murderous and evil and unjust, because he murdered innocent people, as Jacob said when he was laying on his deathbed. And so when Jesus was on earth, he was dealing with that very same extremism. Joseph had the cloak of many colors, meaning Joseph represented the coming together of humanity. Judah, whose line Jesus would come from, married a Canaanite, representing the joining of the Gentiles with Israel. Jesus came along and he represented what? He represented Israel and humanity coming together like the cloak of many colors. And that is why when Jesus went into the temple, he whipped the merchants out and he said, my Father's house was built to be a house of prayer for all nations. The many colors on Joseph's cloak, the many colors on Joseph's garment. And who murdered Christ? It was the Levites. They wanted Christ dead, and they called for his death, and they conspired to have him killed. Look at the main conspirators: Caiaphas, Levite, and Mr. Annas or Ananiah, also a Levite. So the descendants of Levi, that man who murdered those Shechemites, that man who wanted to murder his own brother Joseph, his descendants would then murder the Messiah, who represented what? The coming together of all the colors that were presented on Joseph's garment. It's super fascinating stuff. So Christ comes along and he says, my Father's house, the temple, was built to be a house of prayer for all nations, meaning all of humanity is supposed to come together under God, just like those Shechemites were supposed to be allowed to come together with Israel, but they were not allowed, and you guys stopped it. You, the Levites, have stopped it. You, the Levites, have gone against the unification of mankind. And that's why Jesus said, you see this centurion, he's not even Jewish, but he has more faith than all of you and all of Israel. What was he trying to say? He was trying to combat the racism that was prevalent at that time, the tribalism that was prevalent at that time. And Jesus was facing that very extremism. Here comes this Jesus, and he's saying what? Love your enemies, love the foreigners, allow foreigners to pray in the temple. We can't allow this. Kill this man. Extremism. That's extremism. And so it was extremism that murdered Christ. And it is extremism that is the ultimate sign of a society's decay. For if it was extremism that killed Christ, then extremism is the ideology of Antichrist. And that's what worries me about this rise of right-wing nationalism. It cloaks itself as Christianity. It cloaks itself as conservatism, but it is nothing like Christianity. It has no relation at all to Christianity. And you see this sort of extremism today. Oh, well, some foreigners have committed crimes. Okay, that means we go against all the foreigners. Yes, they were, and also you see this thing in Israel. They were Gazans who did evil things, yes, on October the 7th. But what does Israel want to do? Israel wants to kill tons of people in Gaza. They've already killed tons of people. They think they have a right to do any crime they want to the Gazans. So, for example, there was a situation where a Gazan man got sodomized by Israeli soldiers. And there was an Israeli politician who said, oh, he deserves it because he's a Gazan and or he's a terrorist. So therefore, we can do whatever punishment we want. We can sodomize him. We can do whatever we want. Anything is justified. That's extremism. There is no reason. Oh, there's a story I almost forgot to mention in the book of 2 Chronicles. There's a story where, you know how Judah and Israel got separated? Well, Judah went into wickedness. They were doing child sacrifice and they were worshiping pagan idols, worshiping Baal and all that. So the book of 2 Chronicles says that God gave Judah into the hands of Israel. And so Israel goes to war with Judah. God allows it to happen to punish Judah. And then what happens? Israel defeats Judah, and the Bible says that Judah slaughtered 100,000. Israel slaughtered 100,000 100,000 of Judah's soldiers on the battlefield. Imagine that, 100,000 people killed on a single battlefield. That's insane. So Israel slaughtered 100,000 of Judah's soldiers on the battlefield. And Israel thought, well, we're justified. I mean, God has given Judah to our hands. We are justified to do whatever it is that we want. And then the Bible says that Judah, the soldiers of Israel, the men of Israel said, now that we've defeated Judah, we've killed all these men, let's take their women. And the Bible says that they took 200,000 of Judah's women. 200,000 women. So God speaks to a prophet. And I think that prophet's name was Oded. I don't remember his name. But God speaks to a prophet. And God says through this prophet, I have given Judah to your hands, Israel. I gave Judah to your hands. But the pile of corpses that you have made is reeking to the heavens. In other words, yeah, Judah was evil. Judah did wrong. But you guys took it way too far. Your response to Judah, because you felt so justified, was to slaughter 100,000 people and to kidnap 200,000 women. And God said, I'm going to punish you, Israel, unless you return those women back. So what does the story tell us? It tells us that there is a balance, right? There needs to be a balance. Even when you know the enemy is evil, or even when you know that you're on the good side, you have to understand that that doesn't justify doing crimes. That doesn't justify genocide. That doesn't justify doing mass murder. And if you look at every genocide in history was accompanied with the apologists for those genocides. Every single genocide is accompanied by apologists who make up arguments to justify the genocide. If you look at even the Armenian genocide, they were Armenian terrorists, you know. No one talks about that, but it's the truth. They were Armenian terrorists, and they were butchering Muslim civilians, and the Ottoman Empire said, okay, we have to deal with this problem. And so they said, we have to answer the Armenian question, because these Armenians are an enemy of the Ottoman Empire. They're always allying with the Russians. They have Armenian terrorists in their midst. They've been murdering civilians. We have to answer the Armenian question. And the answer that the Ottomans tried to do was genocide. Same thing goes with Nazi Germany, right? Another extremist society, another example of extremism in history. You had a problem with Bolshevism, right? You had a problem with Marxism in Europe. You had a problem with communism, and the communists were mass murderers, and they were always trying to foment revolutions all over Europe. They were trying to do revolutions in Germany, and they actually attempted revolutions within Germany. Multiple revolutions were attempted by Marxists in Germany. You had the Hamburg Revolution. You had the Munich Revolution. You had a few other ones. And so there was the Spartacist Revolution as well. And these were all revolutions that were done by Marxists. So Germany had a problem with Marxism. So the Nazis take power, and they said, we're going to answer the Marxist question. Now, they didn't present it entirely like that. They said, we're going to answer the Jewish question, because their perspective was that being Jewish became synonymous with either being a Marxist or being a greedy capitalist who was sucking all the resources away from the German people. So they had an extremist position. If you were a Jew, you were an enemy. You were either a Marxist or you were an evil capitalist who was draining the society of resources while the German people starved. So there was a problem with Marxism. I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, every historian acknowledges this. And so the Germans said, we have to answer the Jewish question, because you have these Jewish people who are Marxists, and they're trying to undermine our society. And they've done several, there have been Jewish terrorists who have done several revolutions, like Eugene Levine, Rosa Luxemburg, etc. So we have to answer the Jewish question. And their answer to this question that they presented was one of genocide. So there was a problem with Bolshevism. There was definitely a problem with Marxism. But the solution that the Nazis presented was an extremist solution that was filled with mass murder, just like the solution of Simeon and Levi to their sister being raped was to do mass murder on the Shechemites. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that. Extremism is the ultimate sign of a society's decay. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.